People keep asking why small parties, activist groups, universities, nonprofits, and online movements act like they would rather stay irrelevant than get bigger. They are not confused. They are following a rule. The iron law of purity is this: the people who control institutions care first and foremost about the purity of the institution and their power within it, rather than the power or success of the institution itself. Thus, they would rather the institution remain small, doctrinally correct, and even electorally or culturally dormant, so long as they remain in charge, than let it grow, win, or become widely noticed if that requires them to share power with a broader, less orthodox base. They will accept dormancy as the price of control. This is true for parties, churches, universities, unions, corporations, nonprofits, and internet scenes. It is not a conspiracy. It is what happens when leaders are chosen for fidelity first and result second. Growth that dilutes the inner circle looks like death. Irrelevance looks like safety. I learned the first half of the law the hard way in 2020. I learned the second half watching the Libertarian Party in 2024. Purity is real. So is the counterfeit version of growth that sells the institution's line, its ballot, and its soul to a bigger machine. 2020, the green version. That spring, my former boss, Jesse Ventura, tested the waters for a green presidential run. He endorsed the party, he authorized a letter of interest, he joined the Minnesota Greens, he is a former governor, a known third-party independent, and a name people who don't live inside of activist listservs actually recognize. Some Greens wanted that. A broader independent base wanted that. The national apparatus did not. Howie Hawkins had already been running for a year. He was a longtime Green insider, a quote-unquote co-founder type, a man the existing leadership already knew and could manage. At the July virtual convention, he took 210 of about 355 delegates. Ventura, who had already technically withdrawn in early May after saying the timing would cost him his job and health insurance, still picked up a handful of write-in support. The Alaska Greens and I later drafted him against the national ticket. That was the closest the party came to noticing that a larger audience existed. Hawkins finished with 407,068 votes, 0.26%. In September 2020, Newsweek reported that Google's U.S. elections in search snapshot had him at 0% of the candidate searches that week. Trump and Biden split almost the entire pie. The Libertarian was at least on the board. The Green nominee was not. Hawkins joked that the article itself might give him traffic. That is not a campaign that broke through. That is a campaign the country could not find. Call it structural if you want. Two-party media, pandemic petitioning, lawsuit fights over ballot lines. All of that is real. None of it explains the preference. The people who already ran the party did not treat a higher name recognition independent as an opportunity to grow. They treated him as a risk to the room they already occupied. A dormant campaign they controlled was safer than a live one they might not. That is the iron law of purity in one election. Better a 0.26% result you own than a bigger tent you have to share. Jesse understood something the National Green Office did not. As far back as 2015, he was already circulating an iconic anti-Zionist, Cynthia McKinney, as a possible running mate, years before he ever needed one, and without having to recast himself as a movement speaker on Palestine. McKinney had been the Green presidential nominee in 2008. She had been in Gaza. She ran the blockade 3 times. She had a record. When Alaska drafted Ventura in 2020, McKinney was the vice presidential name that went with him. That was not an accident of a Zoom poll. It was long-range taste. You do not wait until the bombs are falling to figure out who you are willing to stand next to. 2024, the libertarian version and the catch. If 2020 were the whole story, the law would be simple. Insiders pick the safe priest, the party stays invisible, the outsiders go home. 2020 made it more complicated because growth can be arrayed. At the Libertarian National Convention in Washington that May, delegates spent a weekend being courted by Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They nominated Chase Oliver instead. Kennedy was added to the nomination list late and died in the first round with about 2% of the vote. Trump was a sideshow the chair could not put on the ballot. Oliver, whom I don't much like, beat the field after 7 rounds, including a final against none of the above. Then, Colorado tried the move I know from the other side. The Libertarian Party of Colorado refused Oliver. In July, it voted to put Kennedy and Nicole Shanahan on its line instead. That is the state party draft. Take the ballot that the National Party earned, hand it to the celebrity who could not win the room. It is what Alaska and I did with Jesse. Kind of. Kennedy tried to pull it off with the Libertarians in Colorado. He failed. The National Party filed Oliver first. Colorado's ballot carried Chase Oliver as the Libertarian. The raid did not stick. My Alaska rebellion with the Greens stuck because Jesse was a fundamentally different candidate than Kennedy. The raid did not stop at the ballot. After the convention rejected Kennedy, the Libertarian National Committee still cut a joint fundraising deal called the Kennedy Victory Fund, a vehicle that kept taking checks for Team Kennedy and the LNC even after Kennedy quit the race and endorsed Trump. Open Secrets later showed the fund raising about $6.1 million, with nearly $2.8 million transferred to the National Committee and more rooted through state affiliates, including Colorado. That is what selling the line looks like when the draft fails. You keep the celebrity's donor ceiling and call it partnership. I detest Robert Kennedy Jr. more than I dislike Chase Oliver. That is not a personality contest. It is a record. Kennedy's 2024 run did not come out of a clean, independent revolt. It was midwifed by the same operators who later delivered him to Trump. Roger Stone recruited Kennedy and was talking a Trump-Kennedy ticket in 2023, treating Kennedy as a useful piece on the board, and later helped close the alliance after Kennedy quit the independent race. Stone has denied running the campaign or urging the bid, but the evidence is damning. The trajectory is still the point. A man recruited into the year as disruption for somebody else's war ended the year as a surrogate. That is not a third-party project. That is a loan. And when the independent base was desperate for an anti-Zionist voice at the start of the Gaza genocide, Kennedy was not that voice. In March 2024, he told Reuters that any other nation in Israel's position would, quote, go and level it with an aerial bombardment, end quote, then praised Israel as the, quote, moral nation, end quote. That had not. Jill Stein, who I don't like either, called him on the leveled line in public. Oliver, whatever else I think of him, used his acceptance speech to talk about ending the genocide in Gaza. I have not much love for the Oliver faction. On that choice, I side with them over the people who were pushing Kennedy onto a libertarian line. Though I voted for my newest mentor, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, over Stein and Oliver, Dr. Shiva satisfied me best on the issue of Palestine. This is the nuance the green story by itself cannot carry. Purity can mean we will not dilute the inner circle, even if the institution stays at 0.26% and zero in search. Purity can also mean we will not rent the line to a bigger animal that does not share the load-bearing parts of the creed. Both can look like stubbornness from the outside. They are not the same act. One protects officers. The other protects the thing the officers are supposed to be for. I love my new friend, Dr. Michael Rechtenwald. I thank him for the adventures. He was the Mises Caucus candidate, led early ballots, and lost after the deal that made Oliver the nominee. He put skin in a fight most professors never walk into. That matters to me. I still have to say this clearly. I pursue victory and popularity. I will not pursue them at the cost of my soul. That is what it cost the Mises Caucus to play with Trump and Kennedy, the invitations, the keynote, the fantasy that a party of peace and markets could borrow a nationalist celebrity, extract a promise, and remain itself. Some of that faction then drifted toward Trump after Oliver won. Rechtenwald was not Kennedy. The current that wanted Kennedy and the current that treated Trump as a guest of honor were playing a different game than grow the institution without selling it. Jesse courting McKinney in 2015 is the opposite of Kennedy talking about leveling Gaza in 2024. One is building a ticket that can speak to the independent base you actually need. The other is borrowing a famous name whose foreign policy would have emptied that base on contact. What the law is, after both cycles. Schwartz's iron law of institutions said, leaders protect their rank inside the institution, even if the institution itself gets weaker. Pornell said the people who serve the organization beat the people who serve the mission. Mitchells said organizations become oligarchies. The iron law of purity adds the extra motive that makes small ideological shops so stubborn. For them, the organization is the faith. New members who are not already converted look like contamination. 2020 showed the cheap version of the law, keep the priest, accept dormancy. 2024 showed the expensive fake opposite, chase popularity so hard you hand the church to a visiting bishop who will leave with the silver. The test is not insider or outsider. The test is whether the outsider is joining the institution or eating it. Ventura, on a green line with McKinney, is one kind of outsider. Kennedy, on the libertarian line, after a stone world courtship on his way to Trump, is another. You can watch both patterns anywhere the priesthood outranks the parish. A campus group would rather stay a 12-person reading circle than let in students who agree on the issue but not the vocabulary. A nonprofit would rather miss its metric than hire someone who might become the public face. A union staff would rather lose a shop than let a popular rank-and-file candidate redefine the brand. A company with a strong internal culture would rather shrink than promote the person customers actually like. A church would rather empty the pews than change the music. An online movement would rather stay a, quote, tweet club than become a majority. And the other failure? A desperate chapter would rather put a celebrity on the letterhead than admit the celebrity does not believe the letter. They will tell you they are protecting the mission. Sometimes they believe it. The test is simple. Offer them a deal. More power for the institution, less monopoly for the current officers, without laundering a candidate who would torch the load-bearing principle the day after the filing deadline. If they flinch at growth, you are seeing 2020. If they flinch at no price being high enough, you are seeing 2024. This cannot be repealed. People like being the ones who decide what counts as serious. What can be done, sometimes, is to stop pretending dormancy is a noble sacrifice, and to stop pretending a raid is a coalition. Both are choices. In 2020, the people on the inside chose control, and the Green Party paid for it in silence. In 2024, the people chasing a shortcut chose a name that could not say the word the independent base needed to hear. One faction kept the keys and hid. The other tried to sell the keys and missed. If you run something, ask the ugly questions before the next fight. Would we rather be found or remain unchallenged? And if we are found, is the person walking in joining us or collecting us for someone else? If you cannot answer both, you already know which law you are under.